You made it. We've got 4 Chan threads tonight that are messed up and deeply disturbing. The kind that get buried after a few hours. These stories are real and they're twisted. Hit like, subscribe, turn it up, and we're in. The call came in around 2:40 in the morning, 3 days before Christmas, and the address was one of those old 3-story brick houses off Butler Street in Lawrenceville. You know the kind. Built when Carnegie was still walking around, cut up into apartments in the 70s, never really updated. Fires in those buildings move fast because the walls are basically kindling under 100 years of paint. I was riding with Ricky, who'd been on the job maybe 5 years, and our lieutenant, a guy everybody called Buzz because he shaved his head every Sunday whether it needed it or not. When we pulled up, flames were coming out of the second-floor windows on the alley side. Neighbors were on the sidewalk in pajamas and coats thrown over pajamas. A woman was screaming at us in Polish. Somebody was translating. Her husband was still inside, second-floor rear, and she thought maybe her nephew too, but the nephew might have been at a friend's house. She wasn't sure. That's how it usually goes. Nobody knows for certain who's in a building at 2 a.m. Kids get picked up by grandma, cousins crash on couches you didn't know they were on. You go in assuming everyone's home and you count them out one by one. Buzz took me and Ricky up the interior stairs while another team hit the fire from the front. Second floor, we found the husband in the hallway, disoriented, coughing hard. We got him down and out. Then Buzz keyed the radio and said we were pushing up to 3. Third floor was worse. Not because of flames, they hadn't broken through, but the smoke was so thick our lights just bounced back at us. You couldn't see your own glove in front of your face. We were doing it by touch, sweeping walls and tapping door frames, calling out. That's when I heard the crying. It came from the back bedroom, and it wasn't a scream, it was that low, steady sob a kid does when they've been crying so long they don't have the energy for anything louder. Ricky heard it too. He grabbed my sleeve and we went. The door was closed but not locked. Inside, the smoke had layered itself along the ceiling, and about waist high, there was a thin band where you could almost see. She was sitting on the floor by the bed, little girl, maybe 7, 8, pink pajama pants, a t-shirt with something faded on it I couldn't read, one sock. Bare feet on the floorboards. She was hugging her knees, and she looked up at me when the beam of my flashlight found her, and her eyes were very dark and very calm, calmer than a kid in that situation had any right to be. I said, "Hey sweetheart, we're gonna get you out, okay?" She didn't answer. She just lifted her arms. I picked her up. She weighed what a kid that size weighs. She put her face into the side of my neck, right against the collar of my hood, and I felt her cold. That's the thing I keep coming back to. She was cold. In a room that had to be 130 degrees, her cheek against my neck was cold, like she'd been outside without a jacket. Ricky was behind me the whole way down. I know that for a fact because he had his hand on my shoulder pack the whole descent, calling floors on the radio, second landing, first landing, out the door. I felt her arms around my neck the whole time. I felt her weight shift when I turned to angle through the doorframe so I wouldn't bump her head. Outside, the cold hit different after the heat. Everything on the sidewalk was blue and red and white from the lights. I walked to the AMBO, where 2 medics were set up at the back doors and said, "3rd floor, back bedroom, smoke exposure, she's responsive." The medics looked at me, then they looked at each other, then they looked at me again. The younger one, a woman with a braid down her back, said, "Where'd you get her from?" I said, "I just told you, 3rd floor." "Sir," she said, and her voice did something, went careful. The kind of careful you use with somebody who might be concussed. I turned my head to say something to the kid, tell her the medic was gonna check her out. And there was nothing against my neck. My arms were still up. My hands were still cupped like I was holding a small body. There was no small body. I want to be clear about this. I didn't drop her. I didn't set her down. There was no moment where I felt weight leave my arms. One second I was carrying a child. The next second I was standing there with my hands in the shape of carrying a child and nothing in them. Ricky was 2 steps behind me. His face had gone the color of old paper. He said, real quiet, "Where'd she go?" Not a question, exactly. More like he was asking the sidewalk. Buzz came over, pulling his mask off, sweating through everything. Looked at me, looked at Ricky, looked at my empty hands. Said, "You two okay?" The medic said, "They brought a kid out. There's no kid." Buzz didn't say anything for a second. Then he keyed his radio and asked for a head count from the officer working the sidewalk. Answer came back inside a minute. Everyone from the building was accounted for. 2 children, resident. Both had been on the street since before we arrived. One was 7, one was 4. Both boys. Both with their mother by the second engine. There was no little girl in pink pajamas on the manifest. There was no little girl in the neighbors' stories. The Polish woman's nephew was at his friend's house on Main Street, confirmed by phone within 10 minutes. 3 people on the sidewalk had seen us come out. A guy from across the street, an older man from 2 doors down, and the medic's partner, an older guy named Del. All 3, without being asked together, said the same thing. A firefighter came out of the front door carrying a small child. Another firefighter was right behind him with a hand on his back. The child had dark hair. The child was not moving much. Del said he'd started prepping pediatric oxygen before we even reached the ambo. He had the mask in his hand when we walked up. He remembers looking down to grab the pulse ox and looking back up and my arms being empty, and he thought for a second he'd lost his mind. They pulled the footage off my chest cam that night. I watched it the next morning with Buzz and 2 guys from the department who don't usually come out for house fires. You can see me on the 3rd floor. You can hear the crying. You can see me kneel down and say the thing I said. You can see my arms come up like I'm lifting something. And then you see me walk out of that room and down 2 flights of stairs and out the front door with my arms held exactly the way you'd hold a child. Elbows in, hands cupped, shoulders angled to protect a head. Nothing in them, not a blur, not a shape, not a smudge on the lens. Empty air, held like it mattered. Ricky quit 6 weeks later. He didn't tell anyone why, and I didn't ask. We haven't really talked since. I ran into him once at a Sheets Off the Parkway, and he looked at me the way you look at somebody you used to know before something happened, and then he paid for his coffee and left. The official report on that fire has 3 floors cleared, 1 civilian rescue on the 2nd, no casualties. My name is on it, Buzz's name is on it, Ricky's name is on it. The 3rd floor is listed as searched and empty. I still go to work. I still go into buildings. I've carried people out since then, and it's fine. It's the job. But sometimes on a call, when the smoke gets thick enough that my light just comes back at me, I catch myself listening for a kid crying in a back bedroom. And the part I don't tell anyone is that some nights when I'm falling asleep, I feel a small cold cheek against the side of my neck, right where her face was, and I lie very still and I don't open my eyes, because I already know there won't be anything there when I do. This was late October 2021 in Cleveland, on a Wednesday I think. I'd been at a friend's place off Detroit Avenue watching the Guardians lose again, drinking too many beers, and my car was in the shop that week. I'd taken the bus over. By the time I left, the last bus had already gone and Uber was showing surge pricing that made my jaw drop, so I decided to walk 3.5 miles. I'd done longer, the direct route home, cut through the flats, and then up through this stretch of dead industrial blocks on the near west side. Old brick warehouses, a couple of shuttered foundry buildings, chain link fences half torn down. During the day it's just ugly. At 3 in the morning it's something else. But it saved me about 20 minutes off going around, and I'd walked it in daylight plenty of times, so I turned in. For the first 10 minutes it was fine, just the sound of my sneakers, a distant truck on the shoreway, that cold wind that comes off Lake Erie in October and finds every gap in your jacket. The streetlights were the old orange sodium kind, most of them dead. Every 4th one worked, so I was walking through long stretches of dark, and then a puddle of amber light, and then back into dark. It smelled like wet cardboard and old grease. I passed the shell of what used to be a machine shop. Somebody had spray-painted tank across the loading door in blue. Past that, there's a narrow gap between 2 buildings, maybe 8 feet wide, that I'd never really looked at before. Just an alley. Old fire escapes hanging off one side. A dumpster that had been there so long the wheels were rusted into the asphalt. I would have walked right past it. I did walk right past it. And then something made me stop and look back, and I still can't tell you what. Not a sound. Nothing moved. I just felt like I'd walked past something and my brain took an extra second to catch up. I turned around and took 2 steps back and looked down the alley. There were kids, 8 of them, I counted later, standing in a loose group about 30 feet in, past the dumpster, in a spot where a bit of moonlight was coming down between the roofs. The oldest was maybe 14, the youngest looked like a 1st grader. 2 of the smaller ones were in pajamas. One had on a puffy coat way too big for her. None of them had shoes on that I could see properly, just socks or slippers. They weren't doing anything. They were just standing there, facing the mouth of the alley, facing me. My first thought was that it was some kind of prank, some TikTok thing. I actually looked around for a phone camera, that's how sure I was. But nobody was giggling, nobody was moving. They weren't holding phones, they weren't holding anything. "Hey," I said. My voice came out too loud in that quiet. "You guys okay?" Nothing. I want to be clear about something. I have a niece. I've got 2 nephews. Kids at 3 in the morning, in socks, in an alley in a part of town where nobody lives, in October in Cleveland where it drops into the 40s at night. That is not a situation you walk away from. Doesn't matter what your gut is doing, you check. So I stepped into the alley. I got about halfway to them, close enough now that I could see faces. They were pale, but not sickly pale, just cold. A A couple of them were shaking a little. One of the smaller boys had his hand on the shoulder of a girl about his age, holding on, not moving. Their eyes tracked me the whole way in, and I have never in my life had a group of kids look at me like that. Not scared exactly. More like the way a dog looks at something it hasn't decided about yet. I stopped about 10 feet short of them. I didn't want to get any closer. "Are you lost?" I said. "Do you need me to call somebody?" The oldest one took a step forward. Skinny kid, dark hair down over his eyes, wearing a Cavs hoodie that had gone almost gray from washing. He looked me straight in the face. "You shouldn't come here," he said. That was it. Flat, quiet, no threat in it. Not, "Get out of here." Not, "Leave us alone." Just the sentence, delivered the way you'd tell somebody the store was closed. I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, and he'd already stopped looking at me. He turned his head slightly, not toward the other kids, toward the building on the left. The window on the second floor, boarded up like the rest. But I noticed for the first time that the plywood on that particular window wasn't nailed on. It was resting in the frame. I backed out of the alley. I want to say I did it slow and careful. I didn't. I got to the sidewalk and I walked fast for about a block, and then I stopped under one of the working streetlights and I called 911. I told the dispatcher exactly what I saw. She asked me twice if I was sure about the number of kids. She asked me if anyone was hurt. I said I didn't know. I said they looked cold. She kept me on the line and told me to stay where I was in the light, and about 6 minutes later I saw the blue and red come around the corner from the other end of the block. 2 cruisers, then a third, then later an ambulance and something from Family Services with the city logo on the side. I told the first cop everything. He wrote it down, and then he asked me to wait, and I stood there for maybe 40 minutes in the cold, watching the flashlights move in and out of that alley and up into the building. At one point, I saw them bringing kids out, wrapped in those foil emergency blankets. Not just the 8, more. I counted 11 blankets before I stopped counting because it started to feel wrong to be counting. The cop who took my statement came back and told me I could go. He was decent about it, told me I did the right thing calling. I asked, dumb question, if the kids were okay. He said something that stuck with me. They're going to be. They wouldn't have been. I got the rest of the story in pieces over the next few weeks. Some from a local reporter who tracked me down, some from a friend of mine whose sister works in the county system. 3 families had been squatting in the upper floors of that building for something like 8 months. No power, no water, kerosene heaters, a whole setup. Adults working day jobs, coming and going through a back service door. 8 kids between the 3 families. Some of them had never been enrolled in school. The youngest was 6. The kids in the alley had a job. When somebody walked by after dark, they'd go down and stand in the gap and wait. If the person didn't notice them, fine. If the person did, the oldest would say his line. That was it. Not threats, not weapons, just kids, in the dark, saying please don't come here. It worked mostly. Drunks would see them and cross the street. A couple of homeless guys they were worried about had turned around and walked back the way they came, spooked without knowing why. It was the one thing the parents had figured out that scared adults off without bringing attention. I was the first person, the cop said, who walked into the alley instead of away. That's the part that sits with me. In my head at the moment, I was the adult doing the responsible thing, and the kid in the Cavs hoodie was the one behaving strangely. From where he was standing, from the inside of that life, I was the thing that shouldn't be there. He said his line, the way he'd been taught, and he waited to see what I'd do. The families got split into services. 2 of the kids went to relatives out in Parma. I don't know what happened to the rest. I don't walk that stretch anymore, but not because of what I saw. Because whatever I picture down there now, the alley isn't empty. It's still got kids standing in it, in socks, waiting for the next guy to come by, and I know they're not there, but that's what my head does with it. I noticed it in a spreadsheet, which is probably the least dramatic way anyone has ever noticed something wrong. This was December 2021, Minneapolis, second winter of the pandemic. I was working nights at the dispatch center off Chicago Avenue, the kind of job where you spend 8 hours in a room with no windows, drinking coffee that tastes like the pot it came from, listening to a radio that never really goes quiet. My shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I liked it. Days I couldn't handle, honestly. Too much sun, too many people asking how I was doing. The dispatch software we used was called something like SentinelCAD. I won't get too specific. It had been rolled out maybe 2 years before I started, replacing an older system that everyone on day shift still complained about. The pitch, when it was pitched to us, was that it would optimize call routing, faster response, smarter allocation, less human error. All the usual bullet points from a vendor demo. I first noticed the thing because I'm a nerd about numbers. That's it. That's the whole reason. Nobody told me to look. On slow nights, I'd pull the previous week's response data and just poke around, sorting by neighborhood, by call type, by hour. I told my wife it was because I wanted to be good at my job. Really, I just liked the way the columns lined up. Anyway, one night in October, before all of this, I sorted the data by zip code and average time to dispatch. Not time to arrival, that involves traffic and weather and 100 other things. Just the gap between the call coming in and a unit being assigned. That gap should be tiny. Seconds, ideally. North Minneapolis was slower, not by a lot. By 90 seconds on average, maybe a little more depending on the week. South and Southwest were faster. I stared at the number for a while and then closed the tab and went to refill my coffee. 90 seconds is nothing. That's what I thought. That's what the training would tell you. Human variance, different call volumes, different unit availability. There are 100 reasons a number can drift, but I kept pulling the data. Once a week, then twice. I went back 6 months, then a year. The gap didn't shrink and it didn't jump around. It sat there like a rock. North side and near north, consistently slower. South, southwest, faster. Same story every month I looked at. I want to be careful how I say this next part, because I don't want it to sound like I figured something out in one dramatic evening. I didn't. It took weeks. I'd sit at my station between calls and try to think of any reason the numbers would look like that. Some of them made sense. Fewer units stationed on the north side at certain hours. Longer average call durations, which tied up crews. Those things I could account for, and when I did, the gap got smaller, but it did not go away. Around Thanksgiving, I started actually reading the documentation for the routing logic, which is a strange thing to admit. There was a PDF on the internal wiki that nobody had opened since 2019, based on the access log. I opened it at like 3 in the morning during a slow Tuesday, ate a bag of pretzels, and read the whole thing while snow piled up on the ledge outside the loading dock. Most of it was what you'd expect. Distance, unit availability, call priority, traffic estimates from a third-party feed, standard stuff. Then there was a parameter called historical response viability. I read that section 3 times. What it did, once I stripped away the language, was weight the routing based on how successful past dispatches to that area had been. And successful was defined partly by how quickly the call had resolved, and partly by something called outcome index, which pulled from hospital and insurance data. Areas where past outcomes were worse got weighted slightly differently. The system wasn't sending units later on purpose. It was optimizing for what it thought was efficient allocation. But because bad outcomes correlate with poverty, with lack of insurance, with all the things you'd expect, the algorithm was quietly deprioritizing the neighborhoods that already had it worst, 90 seconds at a time. I sat there in the dispatch room for a long time after I understood it. There was a woman 2 rows over named Priya, night lead, who I liked. I could hear her talking a caller through CPR compressions on an 11-year-old. She was good at it. Her voice never went above conversational. I remember thinking about the 11-year-old and thinking about the 90 seconds and feeling like the coffee had gone cold in my hand without me noticing. I didn't do anything for a week. Not because I was scared, really. I just didn't know what the right move was. I was a guy on nights. I had no title. I wasn't a data analyst. I wasn't in IT. If I walked in with a spreadsheet and said, "Hey, I think the software is doing something bad," there was a version of that conversation that ended with me being told to focus on my calls. So I built it properly. I pulled 2 years of data, cleaned it, controlled for the variables I could think of: population density, call volume by hour, unit availability. I ran the numbers about 6 different ways, and the pattern held every single time. I wrote it up in maybe 8 pages. Charts, methodology, the paragraph from the PDF, the section about the outcome index. I printed 2 copies because I don't trust email attachments for things that matter. The main dispatch supervisor was a guy named Reg, mid-50s, been there since before the software was installed, drank Diet Coke at 9 in the morning. I caught him at shift change on a Thursday and asked if I could take 15 minutes of his time. He looked at the printout and said, "Walk me through it." I did. He didn't interrupt. When I was done, he said, "Leave this with me." That was the part I wasn't ready for. I'd been running through the whole thing in my head like it was going to be a fight. It wasn't. He'd been at this long enough to know that if a night shift guy comes in with charts, either he's crazy or he's found something, and either way, you find out fast. Technical came in the following week, then someone from the county, then a woman I'd never seen before who I think was a lawyer. I got asked to walk through my methodology twice more, once in a conference room where I definitely didn't belong, sitting across from 6 people with notebooks. Nothing happened for a while after that, which is how these things go, I've learned. There were meetings I wasn't in, emails I never saw, contract language that had to be reviewed. The vendor got involved, and I imagine that took its own long shape. The algorithm was revised in the spring. I don't know exactly when. One week, the parameter documentation was different in the internal wiki, and the historical response viability section was gone, replaced by something more neutral. Nobody sent an email about it. Nobody said thanks. That's not how it works. I pulled the numbers again in June. The north side gap had shrunk to about 20 seconds. 20 seconds isn't nothing either, but it's not 90. I don't know how many calls got routed differently in those months of meetings. I don't know if the 11-year-old lived. I never asked. Priya moved to day shift in February, and we stopped overlapping. I still work nights. I still pull the spreadsheet on slow Tuesdays. The gap moves around a little now, the way real variance moves. Some weeks north is faster than south. That feels closer to right. I keep the printouts in a folder at home, not for any particular reason. Just because when I opened that PDF at 3 in the morning, I didn't think anyone would care, and it turned out some of them did. I worked the overnight desk at the gas company's emergency line for 6 years before this call, and I still can't tell you what the hell happened in November of 2020. I'm posting it here because I don't know where else to put it. Our shift ran 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. out of a low building off the Katy Freeway in Houston. 3 of us on the phones, 1 supervisor, and a crew rotation for the trucks. Slow nights we'd order kolaches from the place around the corner and watch the parking lot fill up with roaches. Loud nights, we didn't talk much at all. The first call came in at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the time because I'd just finished a Coke and was thinking about getting a second one. The voice was a woman, older, maybe 70, thin but steady. She said she could smell gas in her kitchen and she was scared to turn on the light. She gave an address on Ashford Point Drive, out in West Houston past Beltway 8, Cross Street, Briar Forest. She didn't sound panicked. She sounded tired. I ran the protocol, told her to leave the house, don't flip any switches, don't use the phone once she was outside. She said okay in a way that felt more like she was agreeing to be polite than because she planned to actually do it. I dispatched a 2-man crew. Mike was lead that night, driving out of the West Yard. 20 minutes later, he called back on the radio. "Bud, nobody's here." He said the house was dark, locked up, no car in the driveway. He'd done a walk around with his sniffer and got nothing at the meter, nothing at the foundation vents. He knocked on the door for a solid 5 minutes. I asked him to double check the address. He read it back. Same one I had. I logged it as a bad tip and moved on. It happens more than people would guess. Kids, drunks, somebody who mixes up their own street. You send the truck out, you check, you go home. 3 nights later, same time almost to the minute. 2:51 a.m., same voice. I can smell it in the kitchen. I don't know what to do. Same address, Ashford Point. I asked her to confirm the house number. She did. I asked if anyone was with her. She said no, she lived alone. I asked her name and she gave it. Loretta. She said it quiet, like she was embarrassed to be bothering us. I sent Mike out again. He was less patient this time. Called back in 15 minutes. There's nobody here. Same house. Meters off at the street. Whole place is buttoned up. You sure you got the right address? I told him yes. I'd read her the address back over the phone 3 times. She'd said yes each time. She'd said, please hurry. After Mike hung up, I sat with my headset off for a while. My supervisor that night was named Deb. I told her what had happened both times. She pulled the call recordings, and we listened to them back to back. Same voice, not similar. The same phrasing, almost word for word. I can smell it in the kitchen. I'm scared to turn on the light. Deb said prank. She said sometimes older folks get lonely and they get a routine going. She said flag the number, and if she calls a 3rd time, we don't roll a truck. We call HPD to do a welfare check instead. The 3rd call came the next night, then the 4th. Always between 2:40 and 2:55 a.m. Always Loretta. Always the same house on Ashford Point. I stopped rolling trucks after the 3rd one. I did what Deb told me and called the non-emergency police line. They sent a cruiser. Officer walked the perimeter with a flashlight, knocked, reported back what Mike had already reported. Locked house, no car, nobody home. By the 5th call, I was the only one who would pick up her line. The other dispatchers had started letting it ring through. I don't know why I kept answering, maybe because her voice had gotten quieter each time. On the 5th call, I could barely hear her over the hum of my own headset. I broke protocol. I asked her something I wasn't supposed to ask. Ma'am, why do you keep calling? There was a long pause on the line, longer than a person waits. Long enough that I thought the line had dropped. I could hear her breathing, but it was slow, and it didn't match a normal cadence at all. Deep, shallow, like somebody was pulling air for her. Then she said, very clearly, I'm trying to call for help, but nobody comes where I actually am. Then nothing. She hung up, or the line cut, whichever. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds. Then I got up and walked into Deb's office without asking permission and told her we needed to send a crew back out, and we needed to check every house on that block, not just the one on the ticket. Deb didn't argue. Something in my face did the arguing for me. Mike went out with 2 techs. It was around 4 a.m. by the time they got there. I stayed on the radio with him while they worked. He started at the Ashford Point address, same result as always. Then he crossed the street. The house directly across from it was smaller. Ranch style, 1 story, porch light on, newspapers piled on the mat, 3 or 4 days worth. He knocked. No answer. He put his sniffer near the front door seam, and I heard him say, "Quiet." Oh no. He broke a side window and got in. I could hear him coughing over the radio before he even got past the living room. He said the kitchen ceiling had brown staining above the stove, where the pilot had been leaking for God knows how long. He said the whole house was thick with it. His meter was pegged. She was on the floor of the hallway between the kitchen and the bedroom, elderly, thin, in a nightgown, still breathing, barely. Mike got her out onto the lawn, and EMS was there in 6 minutes. She lived. I only found that out 2 days later when Deb told me. Her name was Loretta. I want to be clear about the next part because I've been over it in my head a lot. The number that had been calling us those 5 nights was her landline. We pulled the records. It came back to her house across the street from the address she kept giving. When EMS went through her things, they found her phone on the kitchen counter, unplugged from the wall, handset in the cradle. The battery in the base unit was dead, had been dead for a while, the LED off, the display black. The phone company opened a ticket for us. An engineer came out and looked at the line and the switch. He confirmed the calls had come from her number, at the times we had them logged. He could not explain how a dead phone had placed 5 outbound calls to 811 over the course of 2 weeks. He said it wasn't possible, and then he said it again, like he was trying to convince himself. The report closed as inconclusive. Loretta went to live with her sister in San Antonio after she was discharged from the hospital. I never talked to her. The pause on the 5th call is what I go back to, that slow mismatched breathing. And her saying where I actually am, like the place she was calling from and the place she was lying on that hallway floor were 2 different rooms, and only one of them had a working phone in it. That's where the story stops screaming and goes quiet. Thanks for being someone who listens all the way through. Which narrative got to you most? Tell me in the comments. There's a whole ocean of content waiting. Don't wander too far. I'll be waiting in the next one.